The dust was still settling on Tommy's boots as he walked up the gravel path to his house. It had been a long day checking on the cattle in the far pasture. 3 of his best cows had gone missing last week, and he'd been riding out every morning since then, hoping to find them before the wolves did. The Montana sun was hanging low in the sky, painting everything orange and gold. Tommy pulled his hat off and ran his fingers through his gray hair. At 52, he felt every one of those years in his bones. Ranch life wasn't getting any easier, especially since his wife Lisa had passed 2 years ago. Now it was just him and his 2 kids trying to keep the family business running. Something felt wrong the moment he stepped onto his front porch. The wooden boards creaked under his feet, but there was another sound too, a sound that didn't belong. His old German shepherd, Buddy, should have been barking and running to greet him by now. Instead, there was an eerie quiet that made the hair on his neck stand up. Tommy pushed open the front door slowly. The house felt different, cold, like strangers had been walking through his home, touching his things. He called out for his kids, but his voice just echoed back empty. Katie? Ben? You kids home? Nothing? Just the tick of the old clock on the mantel. He walked through the kitchen, his boots heavy on the linoleum floor. A chair was knocked over. Katie's backpack was thrown on the floor, its contents spilled everywhere. School papers and colored pencils scattered like confetti. His heart started beating faster, than he heard it. A voice from outside, deep and harsh, speaking words that made his blood run cold. Move faster, little girl, or your brother gets hurt. Tommy rushed to the window and peered through the curtains. What he saw made his world collapse. 3 men in dark clothes were dragging his children toward the old red barn. Katie, his 8-year-old daughter, was crying silent tears, trying to be brave. Ben, who was 10 and usually never stopped talking, looked terrified and small. The man holding Ben had a scar running down his left cheek. He was tall and thin, with cold eyes that reminded Tommy of a snake. The second man was shorter but built like a truck, with arms covered in tattoos. The third one looked nervous. Keep looking around like he expected trouble. Tommy's military training from 20 years ago kicked in. He had to stay calm, had to think. These weren't random criminals. They moved too organized, too planned. This wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was something else entirely. He watched as the scarred man pulled out a phone and made a call. Tommy couldn't hear the words, but the man's body language told him everything. This was business. Cold, calculated business. Tommy tried to remember if he'd seen these men before. Had they been watching his property, planning this? The thought made him sick. While he'd been out working, worried about missing cattle, his children had been in danger right here at home. He grabbed his rifle from the gun cabinet, but before he could even check if it was loaded, his front door exploded inward. Wood splinters flew everywhere. 2 more men rushed in, their faces covered with bandanas like old-time bank robbers. Drop it, cowboy, one of them said. His voice had an accent Tommy couldn't place. We're not here to play games. Tommy's hands shook as he set the rifle down. What do you want? Money? I don't have much, but take whatever you need. Just let my kids go. The second man laughed, but there was no humor in it. This isn't about money, rancher. This is about respect. This is about following orders when important people give them. Tommy's mind raced. What orders? What important people? He'd lived on this land his whole life. Kept to himself, paid his taxes. Never caused trouble for anyone. 6 months ago, a very nice lady came to visit you, the first man continued. She had papers for you to sign. A generous offer for your land. But you were rude to her. You said. No, now Tommy remembered. The real estate woman in the expensive suit. She'd come by 3 times, each time offering more money for his ranch. Each time he'd politely declined. This land had been in his family for 3 generations. His grandfather had built the barn with his own hands. His father had taught him to ride horses in these very fields. This wasn't just property. This was home. I told her I wasn't interested in selling, Tommy said. That's not illegal. A man has a right to keep his own land. Wrong answer, the scarred man said as he walked through the broken door. Up close, Tommy could see that his eyes were pale blue, almost colorless. See, that lady works for some very important people. People who don't like hearing the word no. People who think that stubborn ranchers need to learn lessons. Tommy felt his world spinning. Look, if she wants to make another offer, we can talk. There's no need to involve my children in this. The tattooed man stepped forward. Too late for talking, old man. Time for teaching. See, when we're done here tonight, every rancher in this county is going to know what happens when you don't cooperate with the right people. They forced Tommy outside at gunpoint. The evening air felt cold against his skin, or maybe that was just the fear running through his veins. As they walked toward the barn, he could see his children through the open doors. Katie was hugging Ben, both of them sitting on hay bales, trying to comfort each other, but they didn't take him to the barn. Instead, they marched him out into the cornfield, to the old Scarecrow post that had been standing there since Tommy was a boy. The wooden post was weathered and gray, with rusty nails sticking out at odd angles. This seems fitting, the scarred man said. A scarecrow post for a man who's been scaring away our business. They pushed Tommy against the post, the rough wood scraping his back through his shirt. The rope they used was thick and coarse, the kind used for tying down hay bales. They wrapped it around his wrists and ankles, pulling it tight enough to cut into his skin. From where he was tied, Tommy could see the barn clearly. Could see his children inside, could see the men setting up some kind of camera equipment. His heart sank as he realized what they were planning. This wasn't just about sending a message to other ranchers. They were going to record whatever happened next. The scarred man walked over and stood in front of Tommy. Here's how this works, rancher. We're going to make a little movie tonight. A movie that shows what happens to people who don't listen. Your kids are going to be the stars. Tommy pulled against the ropes, but they held tight. Please, they're just children. They don't have anything to do with this. If you want to hurt someone, hurt me. Oh, we will, the man said with a smile that never reached his eyes. But first, you get to watch. You get to know that this is all your fault. That your stubbornness, your pride, cost your children everything. As the sun disappeared behind the hills and darkness started creeping across the ranch, Tommy realized he was running out of time. His children needed him, and he was tied to a post like a helpless scarecrow, unable to protect the only family he had left in the world. But Tommy had survived worse than this. He'd been a soldier once, in places where survival meant using your brain more than your strength, and this was his land. His home? These men might think they had all the advantages, but they didn't know Tommy like his children did. They didn't know that a father's love could make a man capable of impossible things. The rope burned against Tommy's wrists as he tested his bonds for the 100th time. The scarecrow post felt solid behind his back, planted deep in the Montana soil by his grandfather 60 years ago. What had once been a symbol of protection for his crops was now his prison. From his position in the cornfield, Tommy had a clear view of the barn 200 yards away. The old building's red paint was peeling, and one of the doors hung crooked on its hinges. But tonight it might as well have been a fortress. Inside, he could see the shadows of his children moving around. Katie and Ben were still alive, still together, and that gave him hope. The scarred man, who seemed to be the leader, was pacing back and forth in front of the barn. Even from this distance, Tommy could tell he was agitated. The man kept checking his phone, then looking toward the main road that led to town. Something was making him nervous, and Tommy filed that information away. Nervous criminals made mistakes? The tattooed man was setting up what looked like professional camera equipment. Lights on tall stands, a fancy camera on a tripod, even a laptop computer. This wasn't some amateur operation. These people had money and resources behind them. But more importantly, they planned to broadcast whatever they were going to do. That meant they needed time. And time was something Tommy might be able to use to his advantage. The third man, the nervous one, was supposed to be guarding the children. But Tommy could see him constantly looking over his shoulder, jumping at every sound the wind made in the corn stalks. This one was young, maybe early 20s, and clearly not comfortable with whatever they had planned. Tommy closed his eyes and tried to think like the soldier he used to be. In Afghanistan, when his unit got pinned down by enemy fire, panic was the enemy. The ones who survived were the ones who stayed calm, who observed their surroundings, who found advantages in places others only saw problems. His land. That was his biggest advantage. These men might have guns and numbers, but Tommy knew every inch of these 300 acres. He knew where the ground was soft and where it was rocky. He knew which way the wind blew at different times of day. He knew the habits of every animal that lived here. Speaking of animals, where was Buddy? His German shepherd should have been raising holy hell by now. Tommy whistled softly, the way he did when calling the dog in from the fields. Nothing. Then he whistled again, a different pattern. This time he heard something. A soft whine from somewhere in the corn rose to his left. Buddy was alive and free. That changed everything. Tommy had trained Buddy from a puppy, not just as a pet but as a working dog. The dog knew the difference between a friend and a threat. He could follow complex commands, even hand signals from a distance. Most importantly, Buddy was fiercely protective of Katie and Ben. The dog was probably staying hidden because he sensed the danger, waiting for the right moment. The wind picked up, making the corn stalks rustle and sway. Tommy realized the weather might be on his side too. The forecast had called for a storm tonight. Already, he could see dark clouds gathering on the horizon, blocking out the stars one by one. Rain would make things harder for everyone, but Tommy knew his land in all kinds. Oh, if weather. The city criminals DIDN single quotes D. From the barn, Tommy heard the scarred man's voice carrying on the wind. He was talking on his phone again, and this time his tone was angry. No, we can't wait until tomorrow, the man was saying. The boss wants this done tonight. I don't care about your other problems. This sends a message that needs to be sent now. Tommy strained to hear more, but the wind was getting louder. Still, he'd heard enough. These men were working under pressure. From someone higher up? They had a deadline, which meant they might rush things and make mistakes. He started working on the ropes again, but differently this time. Instead of trying to break free through force, he began studying how they were tied. The tattooed man had done the work, and he'd used a standard restraint knot. It was tight, but Tommy remembered something from his military training. Every knot had a weakness if you knew where to look for it. The trick was finding the working end of the rope, the piece that had been threaded through the loops last. If he could get enough slack there, he might be able to work his way out. It would take time and patience, and he'd have to be careful not to let anyone see what he was doing while he worked. Tommy kept watching the barn. The camera equipment was almost set up now. The scarred man was testing the lights, which threw harsh white beams across the barn's interior. In that light, Tommy could see his children more clearly. Katie was holding Ben's hand, and both of them kept looking toward the cornfield, toward where their father was tied up. Tommy wished he could signal to them somehow, let them know he wasn't giving up. But any movement might alert the guards. For now, he had to trust that his kids were smart and brave. They'd grown up on this ranch, learned to handle themselves in tough situations. Katie might be only 8, but she could saddle a horse by herself and knew how to use the emergency radio in the barn. Ben was 10 and knew every hiding spot on the property. The young, nervous guard was getting more jumpy by the minute. He kept walking to the barn doors and looking out into the darkness. Tommy could see him wiping sweat from his forehead even though the night air was getting cooler. This one was definitely the weak link. Then something happened that gave Tommy hope. The scarred man's phone rang again, and this time the conversation was different. Tommy could hear frustration in the man's voice, even from 200 yards away. There seemed to be some kind of problem with their original plan. What do you mean the connection isn't working? The scarred man shouted into his phone. We need to broadcast this live. That's the whole point. People need to see what happens when they don't cooperate. Technical problems. Tommy almost smiled despite his situation. He'd learned a long time ago that the more complicated a plan was, the more ways it could go wrong. These criminals were trying to coordinate a live broadcast from a remote ranch in Montana. They were dealing with equipment, internet connections, timing, and keeping 2 children under control. That was a lot of moving pieces. The rope around his left wrist was starting to give a little. Tommy had found the working end, and was slowly, carefully working it loose. His wrist was bleeding now from the rough rope, but he ignored the pain. He'd deal with worse injuries during his time in the military. Buddy whined softly again from somewhere in the corn. The dog was getting restless, probably sensing his family's distress. Tommy made a decision. He whistled again, but this time, it was a command whistle. 3 short bursts that meant stay hidden, wait for signal. Buddy went quiet immediately. The storm clouds were getting closer now. Tommy could smell rain in the air and feel the electric tension that came before lightning. In about an hour, maybe less, this whole area would be hit with a Montana thunderstorm. The criminals would have to deal with rain, wind, and possibly hail. Their fancy camera equipment wouldn't work well in those conditions. More importantly, the storm would provide cover. Thunder would mask sounds, lightning would create confusion, and the rain would make it harder for them to see clearly. Tommy had worked cattle in storms like this his whole life. He knew how to move safely in conditions that would leave city people stumbling blind. The scarred man finished his phone call and walked over to where Tommy was tied up. His boots squelched in the soft soil as he approached. "Having some problems? With your big plan?" Tommy asked, trying to keep his voice steady. The man's pale eyes narrowed. "Nothing we can't handle, rancher, just a small delay. Gives us more time to get to know your kids better." Tommy felt anger surge through him, but he forced himself to stay calm. Anger would make him sloppy, and his children needed him to be smart right now. "You know," Tommy said conversationally, "this storm coming in is going to be a big one. You can feel it in the air. Might want to think about postponing your little show until the weather clears." The scarred man laughed. "Nice try, old man. But we're not afraid of a little rain." Tommy shrugged as much as his bonds would allow. "Suit yourself. Just thought you'd want to know that these storms can knock out power for miles around. Internet too. Hard to broadcast anything when the lines are down." For the first time, Tommy saw uncertainty flicker across the man's face. He was a city criminal, probably never dealt with rural weather. The idea of losing his internet connection in the middle of nowhere was clearly something he hadn't considered. As if on cue, thunder rumbled in the distance. The storm was getting closer, and with it, Tommy's best chance at saving his children. The first drops of rain started falling just as Tommy felt his left hand slip free from the rope. 20 minutes of patient work had finally paid off. The rough hemp had scraped his wrist raw, but his hand was loose. He kept it positioned exactly where it had been, not wanting to alert anyone to his progress. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by a deep rumble of thunder. The storm was maybe 10 minutes away now, and Tommy could feel the wind picking up. The corn stalks around him swayed and rustled, creating natural cover for any sounds he might make. From the barn, he could hear the scarred man yelling at his companions. Their technical problems were getting worse, not better. The internet connection kept cutting out, and the camera equipment wasn't designed for outdoor use in bad weather. Tommy allowed himself a small smile. Sometimes Mother Nature was the best. A man could have. He started working on his right hand, using the same technique that had freed his left. But this knot was tighter, and he had to be more careful. The young guard was getting nervous about the approaching storm and kept looking in Tommy's direction. "Hey, boss," the nervous guard called out to the scarred man. "Maybe we should move the old man inside. This storm looks pretty bad." "He stays where he is," came the harsh reply. "Let him get wet, might teach him some respect." Tommy was grateful for the man's cruelty. Being moved inside would ruin his chances of escape. Out here in the cornfield, with the storm providing cover and Buddy somewhere nearby, he had options. Inside the barn, he'd be trapped. Another flash of lightning illuminated the entire property for a split second. In that brief moment, Tommy saw something that gave him hope. There was movement in the corn rows about 50 feet to his right. Not the random swaying of stalks in the wind, but deliberate movement. Buddy was repositioning himself, getting ready. For whatever his master might need, the rain was falling steadier now. Fat drops that hit the dry earth with tiny puffs of dust. Tommy tilted his head back and let some of the water run into his mouth. He hadn't realized how thirsty he'd become from fear and adrenaline. From inside the barn, he could hear his daughter's voice. Katie was talking to someone, her young voice. Carrying on the wind. Tommy strained to listen. My daddy taught us what to do in storms, she was saying. You have to stay away from metal things because lightning can hit them. And you shouldn't use electronics during thunder. Smart girl. Even in this terrifying situation, Katie was thinking. She was probably trying to slow down their captor's plans by making them worried about their equipment. Tommy felt a surge of pride in his daughter's courage. The tattooed man's voice was getting more frustrated by the minute. This stupid camera keeps shutting down every time there's lightning. How are we supposed to broadcast anything in this weather? Figure it out, the scarred man snapped back. The boss doesn't want to hear about technical problems. He wants results. But Tommy could hear the uncertainty in the leader's voice, too. Their carefully planned operation was falling apart because of something as simple as a thunderstorm. City criminals never learned to respect the power of nature the way country people did. His right hand was almost free now. Just a few more minutes of careful work and he'd have both hands loose. Then he could start working on the ropes around his ankles. The hardest part would be doing it all without being seen. The nervous guard was pacing back and forth in front of the barn now, his head turning constantly between Tommy and the darkening sky. Every flash of lightning made him jump. This was definitely someone who'd never spent time outdoors during a real storm. Tommy whistled softly. 3 quick notes that meant, come closer in the language he'd taught Buddy over the years. Almost immediately he heard a soft rustling from the cornstalks directly behind the Scarecrow post. The dog was moving into position. What was that? The nervous guard called out, his voice tight with fear. What was what? The tattooed man replied, not looking up from his equipment. I thought I heard something, like a whistle. It's just the wind, you idiot. Stop jumping at shadows. But Tommy knew the guard wasn't imagining things. He'd have to be more careful. With his signals to Buddy, these men might be city criminals, but they weren't completely stupid. The rain was coming down harder now, turning the dusty ground into mud. Tommy could feel it soaking through his shirt, making the rope around his torso slippery. That might actually help when it came time to free himself completely. Lightning flashed again, closer this time, and the thunder that followed came only. Seconds later, the storm was almost on top of them now. In the brief moment of bright light, Tommy caught a glimpse of his son Ben in the barn doorway. The boy was looking directly at him, and for just an instant, their eyes met across the distance. Ben raised his hand slightly, a gesture so small that only someone watching carefully would notice it. It was a signal they'd used during their hunting trips together. It meant, I'm ready. Ready for what? Tommy wasn't sure. But his son was telling him he was prepared to act when the time came. The scarred man was on his phone again, and this time Tommy could hear the anger in the voice on the other end of the call. Even through the rain and wind, the shouting was clear. Someone was not happy with how this operation was going. I don't care about the weather, the voice was saying. Get it done now, or there will be consequences. The scarred man hung up and turned to his companions. Change of plans, we do this the old-fashioned way. No cameras, no broadcast. Just send the message and get out of here. Tommy's blood ran cold. If they weren't planning to record what happened, that meant they might be planning something even worse. Something they didn't want any evidence of. His right hand came free just as another bolt of lightning split the sky. The thunder was immediate now, a deafening crash that shook the ground. In the chaos of light and sound, Tommy quickly moved both his hands to work on the ropes around his chest. The rain was falling in sheets now, turning the barnyard into a muddy mess. The criminals' expensive equipment was getting soaked, and Tommy could see them struggling to protect it with plastic tarps. But the wind kept tearing the tarps away, and everything was getting drenched. This is impossible, the tattooed man shouted over the storm. We need to get inside. Fine, the scarred man replied. Bring the kids into the house. We'll finish this there. Tommy's heart raced. If they moved Katie and Ben into the house, it would be much harder for him to help them. The house had fewer exits, fewer places to hide. And it was farther from where Buddy was positioned. He had to act soon, while his children were still in the barn and while the storm provided maximum cover. The rope around his chest was looser. Now, thanks to the rain making everything slippery, he could probably break free in another few minutes. The nervous guard was supposed to be watching Tommy, but he kept turning away to shield his face from the driving rain. Each time he looked away, Tommy worked frantically at his bonds. The Scarecrow post that had been his prison was becoming his ally, giving him something solid to brace against as he pulled at the ropes. Another flash of lightning, and this time, Tommy saw something that made his heart skip a beat. There was a figure moving through the corn about 30 feet away. For a moment he thought it might be Buddy, but the shape was wrong. Too tall, too human. Then he realized what he was seeing. It was Ben. His 10-year-old son had somehow gotten out of the barn and was making his way through the cornfield. The boy was using the storm as cover, just like Tommy had taught him during their survival games. But why was Ben out here? Had he escaped, or was this part of some plan? Tommy tried to catch his son's attention without alerting the guards, but the boy was focused on moving carefully through the stalks. Then Tommy saw something glinting in Ben's hand. It looked like metal, maybe a tool from the barn. The boy was armed with something, and he was moving with purpose toward the house. Katie was still in the barn with the criminals, but Ben was free and apparently trying to help. Tommy felt a mixture of pride and terror. His son was brave, but he was also just a kid facing armed men. If Ben got caught, or if he tried something dangerous, the consequences could be terrible. The scarred man was shouting orders now, trying to coordinate his people. In the chaos of the storm, "Pack up that equipment. We're moving inside in 5 minutes. Grab the girl, and let's finish this. 5 minutes." That's all the time Tommy had left to free himself and somehow help his children. The rope around his chest was almost loose enough to slip over his head. His ankles were still tied, but once his upper body was free, he could work much faster on those bonds. Lightning flashed again, and in that split second of brightness, Tommy saw Ben had reached the side of the house. The boy was crouched low, staying in the shadows, apparently looking for a way inside. Whatever plan his son had in mind, it was about to unfold. Tommy pulled hard against the chest rope, feeling it stretch and give. Almost there, just a little more, and he'd be free to help his children. The storm that had started as his enemy was becoming his greatest ally, masking his movements and creating chaos among his captors, but time was running out. And the most dangerous part of this nightmare was just beginning. Tommy felt the rope around his chest finally give way as another bolt of lightning lit up the sky. He was free from the waist up, but he kept his arms positioned exactly where they had been. The nervous guard was still glancing in his direction. Every few seconds, and Tommy couldn't risk being discovered now. The rain was coming down so hard that it felt like someone was dumping buckets of water from the sky. Tommy's clothes were soaked through, and mud was forming pools around the base of the Scarecrow post. But the storm was his friend now, masking any small sounds he might make as he worked on the ropes around his ankles through the sheets of rain. He watched the criminals struggling with their equipment. The tattooed man was swearing loudly as he tried to wrap plastic around the expensive camera gear. Water was getting into everything, and sparks were flying from some kind of electrical connection that had gotten wet. Their high-tech operation was falling apart in the face of a simple Montana thunderstorm. Tommy caught another glimpse of Ben moving through the cornstalks. His son was closer to the house now, maybe 20 feet from the back door. The boy was being smart about it, moving only when lightning flashed and everyone's night vision was temporarily ruined. But Tommy was worried about what Ben might be planning. The kid was brave, but he was still just 10 years old. "That's it," the scarred man shouted over the storm. "We're going to the house now. Bring the girl." Tommy's heart sank as he watched. 2 of the men dragged Katie out of the barn. His daughter looked so small between the 2 large criminals, but she wasn't crying anymore. Instead, she had the same determined look on her face that her mother used to get when she was facing a difficult situation. Katie was thinking, planning something. The nervous guard started walking toward Tommy, probably to check on him before. They all moved to the house. This was the moment Tommy had been waiting for. As the guard got within 10 feet, Tommy whistled once, loud and sharp. It was the attack command he taught Buddy years ago. 80 pounds of angry German shepherd burst out of the corn stalks like a missile. Buddy hit the nervous guard from behind, knocking him face first into the mud. The man's gun went flying, disappearing somewhere in the tall grass. Buddy stood over the fallen man, growling low in his throat, ready to attack again if the guard tried to move. What the hell? The tattooed man yelled, spinning around to see what had happened. In his confusion, he loosened his grip on Katie's arm. That was all the opening the 8-year-old needed. Katie twisted away from her captor and ran straight toward the cornfield, just like Tommy had taught her during their emergency drills. The girl was fast for her age, and she knew exactly where she was going. The scarred man pulled out his gun and aimed it toward the fleeing child, but Tommy was ready for that. He whistled again, a different pattern this time. Buddy immediately left the nervous guard and charged toward the scarred man, forcing him to turn his weapon away from Katie, but Tommy wasn't done yet. With his upper body free, he could work much faster on the ankle ropes. He pulled and twisted, ignoring the pain as the rough hemp cut into his skin. The rain had made everything slippery, which actually helped. After what felt like forever, but it was probably only 30 seconds. His feet came free. Tommy rolled away from the Scarecrow post just as the tattooed man fired a shot in his direction. The bullet splintered the old wooden post where Tommy's head had been moments before, but the man was firing blind in the storm, and his night vision was ruined by the constant lightning flashes. Thunder crashed overhead so loud it seemed to shake the earth. In the chaos of the storm, with Buddy attacking one criminal and Katie running for safety, Tommy saw his chance. He sprinted toward the barn, staying low and using the corn stalks for cover. The nervous guard was trying to get back on his feet, but the mud made it almost impossible. Every time he started to stand up, he slipped and fell again. Buddy kept circling him, making sure he stayed down without actually hurting him badly. The dog was smart enough to know the difference between stopping a threat and going too far. Tommy reached the barn and grabbed the first weapon he could find, an old pitchfork that had been leaning against the wall. It wasn't much against guns, but it was better than nothing. More importantly, he knew where his real rifle was hidden. Years ago, after Lisa died, he'd started keeping a spare hunting rifle in a secret compartment he'd built into the barn wall. The criminals had found his main gun in the house, but they didn't know about this one. He pried open the hidden panel and pulled out the rifle, quickly checking to make sure it was loaded. 6 shots. That would have to be enough. Through the barn door, he could see the scarred man and the tattooed man trying to regroup. They were shouting at each other over the storm, trying to figure out what had gone wrong with their perfect plan. The nervous guard was still on the ground, too scared of Buddy to try getting up again. But where was Ben? Tommy had lost sight of his son in all the chaos. He hoped the boy had made it safely into the house, but he couldn't be sure. And Katie was somewhere in the cornfield, hopefully finding one of the hiding spots Tommy had shown her during their practice runs. The scarred man was on his phone again, screaming at whoever was on the other end. Tommy couldn't make out all the words over the storm, but he caught enough to understand that their boss was not happy. The whole operation was falling apart, and someone was going to pay for it. That's when Tommy heard something that made his blood run cold. It was coming from the house, the sound of breaking glass, followed by a young voice crying out in pain. Ben was in trouble. Tommy didn't hesitate. He burst out of the barn, rifle in hand, and sprinted toward the house. The scarred man saw him coming and raised his own weapon, but Tommy was ready. He dove behind an old water trough just as the criminal's shot rang out. The bullet sparked off the metal trough, but Tommy was already moving again. He rolled to his left, came up in a crouch, and fired once. The shot went wide, but it was close. Enough to make the scarred man duck for cover behind a pile of lumber. "Daddy!" the voice came from inside the house. It was Ben, and he sounded scared. Tommy's military training took over completely now. He moved in short bursts, using every piece of cover available. The old truck, a stack of hay bales, even the chicken coop. Each time one of the criminals tried to get a clear shot at him, Tommy was already somewhere else. The tattooed man made the mistake of trying to flank Tommy from the right side. He came around the corner of the house just as Tommy was taking cover behind the porch steps. Tommy was ready for him. One shot, clean and precise, hit the man in the shoulder and spun him around. He dropped his gun and fell to his knees, clutching his wounded arm. "You're surrounded," Tommy called out to the scarred man. "Your boy with the tattoos is down and your nervous friend is too scared to move. Give up now and nobody else gets hurt." But the scarred man wasn't ready to surrender. Instead, he did something that made Tommy's heart stop. He called out toward the house, "I've got your boy in here, rancher. You want to see him again, you better drop that rifle and come inside with your hands up." Tommy heard Ben cry out again from somewhere inside the house. His son was definitely in there, probably hurt, and definitely in immediate danger. But Tommy also knew this could be a trap. The scarred man might be lying, trying to lure Tommy into a confined space where the advantage would shift back to the criminals. Lightning flashed again, and in that moment of brightness, Tommy saw something that changed everything. There was a small face in the kitchen window, Katie's face. His daughter had somehow made it to the house and was inside, probably trying to help her brother. Both of his children were now trapped with an armed, desperate criminal. Tommy had to make a choice. He could stay outside where he had the advantage of mobility and cover, but risk his children being hurt. Or he could go inside where he'd be trapped, but where he could protect Katie and Ben directly. For Tommy, it wasn't really a choice at all. His children needed him, and that was all that mattered. He set his rifle down on the porch steps and walked toward the front door with his hands raised. "I'm coming in," he called out. "Don't hurt my kids. You want me, you've got me." As he reached for the door handle, Tommy caught sight of Buddy positioning himself near the back of the house. The dog was smart enough to know what was happening, and he was getting ready to help in whatever way he could. Tommy took a deep breath and stepped inside, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether his family lived or died. But he also knew something the scarred man didn't, that sometimes a father's love could make a man capable of things that seemed impossible. The real fight was just beginning. Tommy stepped through the front door of his own home, but it felt like entering enemy territory. The familiar living room where his family watched movies together now felt cold and dangerous. Water dripped from his soaked clothes onto the hardwood floor his grandfather had laid by hand 70 years ago. "That's far enough," the scarred man's voice came from the kitchen. "Keep those hands where I can see them." Tommy could hear his children somewhere deeper in the house, but he couldn't see them yet. Ben's voice drifted from what sounded like the back bedroom, talking quietly to someone. Probably Katie, which meant both kids were together. That was good and bad at the same time. Good because they could comfort each other. Bad because one criminal could watch both of them. "You made a big mistake coming after my family," Tommy said, keeping his voice steady as he walked slowly toward the kitchen. "These kids never did anything to you." "Your mistake was not listening when you were told to sell," the scarred man replied. "Important people don't like being ignored. This is what happens when you think you're too good to do business with the right folks." Tommy reached the kitchen doorway and finally saw the full situation. The scarred man was standing near the back door, his gun pointed toward the hallway that led to the bedrooms. There was broken glass on the floor from what looked like a drinking glass, and Tommy could see droplets of blood mixed in with the pieces. Someone had been cut, probably Ben when he tried to get into the house. "Where are my children?" Tommy asked. "Safe for now," the man said with a cold smile. "They're in the back bedroom with the door locked. Your boy tried to be a hero, came through the window with some kind of tool from the barn. Didn't work out too well for him." Tommy's jaw clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. Getting angry wouldn't help Katie and Ben right now. He needed to think, to find an advantage in this situation. "What's the plan here?" Tommy asked. "Your operation is falling apart. Your equipment is ruined, your men are down, and by now someone in town has probably noticed all the lightning hitting our power lines. The sheriff's department checks on outages during big storms." The scarred man's eye twitched slightly. Tommy could tell he'd hit a nerve. These city criminals hadn't thought about how things worked in rural areas, where neighbors looked out for each other and power outages brought people out to check on their friends. "Nice try, rancher," the man said, but Tommy could hear uncertainty in his voice. "But we're going to finish what we came here to do. Maybe not the way we originally planned, but the message will still get sent." That's when Tommy heard something that gave him hope. It was faint, barely audible over the storm still raging outside, but he recognized the sound. It was the distant wail of a siren, getting closer by the minute. The scarred man heard it too. His head snapped toward the window, and for just a moment his attention was divided. Tommy took a half-step closer, but the gun swung back toward him immediately. "Don't even think about it," the man snarled. "I don't know who's coming, but they're going to find a very different scene when they get here." But Tommy was already thinking 3 steps ahead. The sirens meant help was coming, but they were still several minutes away. In a rural county like this, the nearest sheriff's deputy could be 20 miles away when a call came in. He had to buy time and find a way to protect his children until help arrived. "You know what's funny about you city folks?" Tommy said conversationally, taking another small step. "You always think you're smarter than country people. You come out here with your fancy plans and your expensive equipment, thinking we're just dumb farmers who don't know any better." "Shut up," the scarred man said, but Tommy could see him getting more nervous as the sirens grew louder. "But here's what you didn't know about this old ranch," Tommy continued. "My grandfather who built this place was a suspicious man. He lived through the Great Depression when people couldn't trust banks or sometimes even their neighbors. So he built things into this house that most folks don't know about." The scarred man's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" Tommy smiled for the first time all evening. "Well, for instance, he built a hidden panel in the barn wall where I keep a spare rifle. You found that out the hard way when I shot your tattooed friend. But that's not the only surprise he left behind." As if on cue, there was a soft clicking sound from somewhere in the walls of the house. The scarred man spun around, trying to figure out where the noise had come from, but Tommy knew exactly what it was. Every room in the old farmhouse was connected by a system of speaking tubes that his grandfather had installed so the family could communicate during emergencies. Ben had figured out how to use them. "Daddy," came the son's voice, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "Katie's okay. We're in your bedroom and we found the special box you showed us." "The special box?" Tommy's heart leaped. Hidden in his bedroom closet was an old strongbox that contained his most important documents, some emergency cash, and most importantly right now, the spare key to his gun safe. "You've got more weapons in this house," the scarred man said, understanding immediately. "Where?" But Tommy just shrugged. "That would be telling. Besides, it doesn't matter now. You hear those sirens getting closer? In about 5 minutes, this place is going to be crawling with deputies. Your best bet is to run now while you still can." The man's face twisted with rage. "I'm not leaving empty-handed. The boss will kill me if I don't complete this job." "Then you've got a problem," Tommy said calmly. "Because there's no way you're touching my children." That's when the lights went out. The storm had finally knocked out the power, plunging the entire house into darkness. But Tommy had grown up in this house. He knew every creaky board, every piece of furniture, every step by heart. The scarred man, on the other hand, was suddenly blind in an unfamiliar place. Tommy dropped to the floor and rolled toward the kitchen table just as the criminal's gun went off. The muzzle flash lit up the room for a split second, but the bullet went wide, splintering the wooden doorframe where Tommy had been standing. In the darkness, Tommy could hear movement from the back of the house. His children were on the move, probably following the emergency plan he'd drilled into them for situations just like this. Find the gun safe, arm themselves if possible, and get to the root cellar through the trapdoor in the pantry. Another gunshot echoed through the house, but this one sounded different. Higher pitched, sharper. That wasn't the scarred man's gun. That was the sound of Tommy's own hunting rifle, the one he kept in the bedroom gun safe. "Nice shot, Katie," came Ben's voice through the speaking tubes. "But next time aim a little lower." Tommy almost laughed out loud. His 8-year-old daughter had just fired a warning shot at a dangerous criminal, and his 10-year-old son was giving her marksmanship advice. These kids had definitely inherited their father's fighting spirit. The scarred man was cursing loudly now, stumbling around in the dark kitchen, trying to figure out what was happening. He fired twice more, but the shots went wild. He was panicking, and panicked criminals made fatal mistakes. Tommy used the sound of the man's movements to track his position. When the next lightning flash lit up the kitchen, Tommy was ready. He tackled the scarred man from behind, driving him to the floor with all the force of his 200 pounds. The criminal's gun skittered across the linoleum, disappearing under the refrigerator. Both men rolled around on the floor, fighting for control, but Tommy had advantages the other man didn't. This was his house, his territory, and he was fighting for his children's lives. The scarred man was younger and probably in better shape, but Tommy had experience and desperation on his side. He managed to get the man in a chokehold, the same technique he'd learned in military training 20 years ago. "It's over," Tommy gasped, tightening his grip. "Your men are down, the cops are almost here, and my kids are armed. You've got nowhere to go." The man struggled for another few seconds, then went limp. Tommy held the chokehold for a few more moments to make sure he was really unconscious, then rolled away and grabbed a kitchen chair to tie the criminal up with extension cords from the junk drawer, just as he finished securing the unconscious man. The front door burst open and flashlight beams cut through the darkness. "Sheriff's Department, is anyone hurt in here?" "We're okay," Tommy called out. "The threat is neutralized. My kids are in the back bedroom." As the deputy secured the scene and called for ambulances, Tommy's children came running down the hallway. Katie was carrying his hunting rifle like she'd been born with it in her hands, and Ben had a flashlight and the emergency radio from the gun safe. "Daddy!" Katie threw herself into his arms, finally allowing herself to cry now that the danger was over. "You did good, sweetheart," Tommy said, holding both his children tight. "You both did real good." Later, after the criminals had been taken away and the paramedics had bandaged the small cuts on Ben's hands from the broken glass, the sheriff pulled Tommy aside. "The FBI is going to want to talk to you," the sheriff said. "Turns out these weren't just random criminals. They're part of a larger organization that's been pressuring landowners all across the state. Your family's testimony is going to help put a lot of bad people in prison,